changed it to student proficiency. And it only shows you your students, and then you can export it to CSV.
Okay.
And that way you can like sort it and highlight and stuff. Remember, it like counts it for you down at the bottom if you highlight.
Okay.
All right, so let's just kind of run through this real quick. That way, make sure no one has any questions about what exactly we're doing. And Ms. Kaida, I know you're new to teaching, so I want to make sure you understand like the whole purpose of this, and really for all of us to make sure we understand the purpose. DDI stands for Data-Driven Instruction. So what we're doing is we're looking at our data from the first 6 weeks, and then we're trying to plan ahead our instruction based on what our data tells us. So if students are struggling in a particular topic, if there's a particular misconception, how are we going to target those and how are we going to fix it for the next test? So if everyone looks at the front page, it's pretty self-explanatory, part 1. In that top section, you're writing the total number of testers, what their average score was, if they met the satisfactory percentage, which is 70% is satisfactory, okay? And if they got the advanced level, which is if they scored 90% or higher. So in All in Learning, you can adjust the percentage, right, for 70% or 90% and look at that percentage. For the team results, that'll be your PLC group, so that'll be the three teachers' scores combined. And that way you can kind of compare your scores to what you look like as a team, and that'll give you a little bit better picture of where you stand amongst your peers. Okay? Under my results, one of the things we're looking at this year, and I thought was really good, is separating basic students, which is going to be your fundamentals, and then your sheltered. So basics is fundamental or SPED. They're not wanting to call them SPED. We're going to call them basic. Okay? And then sheltered, which is your left kids.
So all SPED count under basic?
All SPED count under basic, yes. Okay? Which hopefully everyone knows who their SPED kids and who are not their SPED kids. And if you're not sure, you can look on my data portal for that information. So same thing, you're looking at how many you have, what is their percent score, their satisfaction, did any of them reach advanced. On the bottom, you're looking specifically at the TEKS, right, and your SEs. You want to look at the 2 highest TEKS. What did you do really well on? Were they readiness standards or supporting standards? And you're going to do the same thing for your lowest 2 TEKS, okay? And that's really important to kind of gauge where are you guys really strong, what are you teaching well, and then what are you struggling with, and how can you kind of bridge that gap? Is everyone struggling with the same thing, where the lesson's just not as good for that TEK? Or maybe is one teacher low in one TEK while the other one is low in something else, right? So then is it the way you're presenting it? Is it the way that you're disseminating information to the kids? So once we do that, you turn onto the back side. We move on to part 2. Part 2 is kind of a reflection time for you to kind of think about what you've done, areas where you need improvement, identifying those SEs that you think will also, SEs that number 1 will be tested on ACPs or on their STAR test, right? And thinking about the implications of how can we improve those and why it's meaningful to try and improve those, right? Is it something simple? Is it an easy misconception? Or is it something more deep where we're just not doing a good enough job teaching it or presenting it where they can understand? So then this next section is where we analyze the actual questions. So that's why I wanted you guys to bring your test. If you look, you have 3 boxes, 3 sets of boxes. One is for your high achieving students, one is for your average student, and one is for your low student, right? So you brought 3 tests. So you're going to look at those questions where they struggle. Oh, all the students struggled on question number 8. So let's look at what the high achieving student did on question 8. Let's look at what the average student did on question 8. Let's look at what the low student did on question 8, right? We're comparing them. If all 3 demographics did poorly, what does that tell us? Then we taught it poorly, right? Now, if our really high achieving students got it, but our low achieving didn't, then that tells us that there's a gap, right? There's that gap between the high and the low achieving, right? So that kind of gives you a good indication of where you stand, if it's a specific demographic you need to target, or is it all the students, okay? Finally, part 3 is where you've already looked at the data, you know what you're struggling with. This is where you plan your actual reteach. And we did this last year, where you pick the SE that you struggled with the most, and then you kind of make a calendar. You say, oh, am I going to pick a specific day and do a mini lesson? Am I going to, teach this in by spiraling it in with homework? Do I want to do now specific to that T? And you're actually plotting what the lessons are going to look like. All right, you're going to tell me, well, they struggle with metals, not metals, metalloids. I think it's because they're missing this. How are we going to address it? Well, the first week we're going to do a mini lesson to kind of go over some of those misconceptions. Second week we'll do a do now to kind of see where they are, how much they've retained, et cetera, et cetera. Okay?
We have set up that a little bit like Thursdays, so throwback Thursdays,
Mhm.
right? For
And absolutely, and so like again, the throwback Thursdays, that can be one of your reteach moments, right, where you're addressing the teaks. We like to be able to test our lowest standard from the first 6 weeks on the second 6 weeks test. So if they struggled on 8.6A the first 6 weeks, we want to test it again on the second 6 weeks and see if we can show growth. We only had 55% passing on that standard in the first 6 weeks. We want to get to 75% by the second 6 weeks. Does that make sense? How are we going to get there? By targeting those specific teaks using our outline that we're making. Does that kind of make sense? Do we get kind of the purpose behind it? Because I feel like talking to some of the other teachers, they were doing it and they can figure out the numbers. And they didn't really get why we were doing it. I think it's really important to understand the purpose behind DDI. I'll be here. We're going to be all work with your team members. We're using All-in Learning to gather the data. We're comparing each other's data. It's important to kind of collaborate and make sure you guys are working together. And if you guys have questions, just feel free to ask, all right? Let's try and see how much we can get done. Obviously, we're trying to finish the packet by tomorrow. We'd like to have an actual plan ready, okay? A lot of this is just inputting information. A lot of it is just comparing one thing to the other. But this is what will take time, is actually creating those lessons to reteach the information, all right? Questions, comments, concerns? Cool. Let's get to it. If you have questions, let me know, guys.